They banned me from my husband's funeral. I stood outside, humiliated. I stood outside the chapel in heels that sunk slightly into the gravel with every breath I took. My palms were sweating, but not from heat. It was shame. Shame clinging to my skin like smoke after a fire you didn't start but were still blamed for. They had shut the doors, not metaphorically, literally. His sister, Caroline, had looked me in the eye, her mouth tight like she was biting back a curse, and said, "He wouldn't have wanted you here." And then she shut them. The sound echoed in my bones. Behind those wooden doors, my husband's casket sat surrounded by lilies I didn't choose, mourners I hadn't invited, and memories being rewritten without me in them. I was his wife for 12 years. I washed his socks, drove him to chemo, held his hand while his mother cursed me in whispers. And now, here I was, locked outside of the only goodbye I was owed. Caroline said I made things complicated, that his children from his first marriage were uncomfortable with my presence, that I had caused enough scenes. What scenes? Was it a scene when I told the hospice nurse to ignore his daughter's sudden demands to cut me from the visitors list? Was it a scene when I asked why no one had told me he was unconscious 3 days before he passed? Was it a scene when I showed up to the hospital anyway, just to press my lips to his forehead one last time? I stood outside that chapel in silence, not a scream, not a sob, just me. People walked past me in dresses darker than their intentions. One woman looked at me like I was trespassing on grief I didn't earn. Another whispered something into her husband's ear. I caught one word, mistress. I almost laughed. I was his wife, on paper, in love, in battle, through diagnosis and decline. But none of that mattered when you're inconvenient in someone else's narrative. I stood there long enough for the service to start. The string quartet played something delicate and hollow. The priest's voice echoed faintly through the walls, calling him beloved father, cherished brother, devoted friend. No one said husband, no one said mine. I should have left, should have driven home, poured a glass of wine, screamed into a pillow, but I didn't. I stood there, arms folded, spine straight, not because I had hope. Hope had long since rotted, but because I knew something they didn't. My husband didn't die with their story. He died with mine, and he left something behind, something only I knew was coming. The lawyer had called me the night before. His voice was calm, almost apologetic. You were included in the will. He made some very deliberate choices. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I just nodded, thanked him, and said I'd be there. Not at the funeral, at the reading. Because when the lawyer opened that will in front of the same faces who had looked down on me like I was some irrelevant footnote, something changed. Their smirks cracked. Their eyes widened. The fake tears stopped mid-performance. And every single person in that room realized. He hadn't left them the legacy they were expecting. He had left it to the woman they had erased. Me. I wasn't his first love, but I was his last. When I met David, he was already someone else's past. A divorcee with 2 teenage kids, a complex family tree, and a bitterness that clung to his shoulders like regret he didn't know how to wash off. He wasn't charming, not in the traditional sense. He was quiet, direct, a little guarded, but he listened. He asked questions and waited for the answers. He made space for silence like it was sacred. We met at a fundraising event for a nonprofit neither of us really cared about. He was standing near the back, staring at the wine selection like it had offended him. I made a joke about the canapes being a cry for help. He didn't laugh, but he did smile just slightly, like his face wasn't used to the movement. That's when I knew. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there because someone probably dragged him out of the house and told him it would be good for him. We started small, coffee dates, short walks, talks that lingered too long on benches after sunset. He didn't pretend to be romantic. He didn't bring flowers or say sweet things just for the sake of it. What he gave me was better. Reliability, consistency. a kind of quiet, grounded loyalty that felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. I wasn't naive. I knew his ex-wife had left deep cuts. I knew his children barely looked me in the eye the first time we met. I knew his sister had already decided I was a placeholder and not worth investing in, but I stayed. Not out of desperation, out of love. The kind of love that's built slowly through soup on sick days, long talks at 2 a.m., and the way he would always put his hand on the small of my back when we crossed the street. We got married 2 years later in a courthouse ceremony with 3 witnesses, my best friend, his friend from work, and the judge. No flowers, no photos. No one from his family showed. His daughter sent a text the morning of that read, "Do whatever you want. It's not like it matters." I cried that night, not because I regretted marrying him, but because I realized I had inherited more than a man. I had inherited his absence in their eyes, his failure, his mistake. But David held my hand and said, "I don't need their approval. I just need you." And I believed him. We weren't glamorous. We weren't adored. We were just 2 people who made dinner together, argued about TV shows, and fell asleep tangled up in the middle of a bed that creaked too loudly. He made me coffee every morning. Black. No sugar, just how I liked it. He kissed me on the forehead when I read in bed. He bought me a lemon tree for our 5th anniversary because I had once said I missed the smell of the trees from my childhood backyard. We weren't perfect. God, we had our share of cold shoulders and slammed doors, but we found our way back to each other every time, until the last year, until the diagnosis. That's when the lines started shifting. That's when his sister showed up more often. His kids started calling again, and suddenly I became the woman who meant well, who needed to be eased out gently. They treated me like a nursemaid, not a wife. He didn't see it. Or maybe he did, and he didn't know how to stop it. He was tired. He was in pain. And when people you love are dying, you don't fight them. You soften. You fold. You shrink. I shrank. For months, I sat at his bedside while they stood at the doorway. I managed medications, tracked side effects, cleaned vomit off the sheets. They showed up with flowers and judgment and left before dinner. Caroline once told a nurse, "She's not family." Not really. She said it in a whisper, but I heard it anyway. David never corrected her, but he would squeeze my hand a little tighter whenever I stayed quiet. Like he knew. Like he saw the way I swallowed my pride every day just to stay by his side. Until the end. Until he slipped away, surrounded by people who had erased me while I stood there pretending I didn't notice. They thought they won. They thought pushing me aside would be easy. That when he took his last breath, I'd vanish like a footnote in someone else's story. But they didn't know what he left behind. They didn't know he'd written me into the ending. And soon, they were about to find out. He started slipping away before his body ever did. It began with fatigue, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. He'd come home from work, loosen his tie, and collapse into the recliner, like gravity had suddenly doubled its pull on him. I thought it was stress. We were both working long hours, and he'd been managing a new account at the firm. But then he started losing weight, noticeably. He said it was just a stomach bug. I believed him for a while, until the night he passed out in the bathroom and hit his head on the edge of the sink. The ER doctor said, mass. The oncologist said, stage 3. The prognosis whispered its answer before anyone said it aloud. He had cancer, pancreatic, aggressive, already metastasizing. It felt like someone had knocked the air out of me with a sentence. David didn't cry when they told us. He just asked how long he had. Then he turned to me and said, "You don't have to go through this with me." As if loving him had an expiration date. As if dying meant I should get off the sinking ship before the water hit my ankles. I looked him in the eyes and said, "I'm not going anywhere." And I didn't. But slowly, the people who had always been on the periphery began circling closer, like vultures who hadn't been seen in years suddenly sensing opportunity. His daughter showed up with a basket of gluten-free muffins and a fake smile. His son, who hadn't called in 5 birthdays, suddenly wanted to reconnect. And Caroline made herself indispensable. She booked appointments behind my back, rearranged his prescriptions, argued with nurses, told anyone who would listen that he needed rest and Margaret just didn't know how to give him space. She spoke like I was an emotional hazard, like I was something to be managed, tolerated, neutralized. David didn't stop her. Maybe he didn't want to upset her. Maybe he was too tired to mediate. Maybe he thought I was strong enough to handle it. But day by day, they chipped away at my place beside him. They started calling themselves the Inner Circle. I wasn't on their group chat. I wasn't included in the hospice updates. One night, after I fed him soup and helped him change his shirt, I walked into the kitchen and found Caroline there, leaning against the fridge like she owned it. She said, "You should take a break. He's been asking for more alone time." I blinked at her. "He said that?" She smirked. "He doesn't have to, we can tell." That's how they did it, through insinuation, through slow edits to the narrative. I wasn't being banned outright. I was being erased gently, like a pencil mark under an eraser pressed just hard enough to leave nothing but a smudge. The last week of his life, I wasn't told he had stopped eating. I wasn't told he was moved to another floor. I wasn't told when the priest came. I found out he had died from a voicemail, from Caroline. Her voice calm, even a little upbeat. "Just thought you should know. David passed this morning. He went peacefully. We'll be handling the arrangements." We. Not you, not us. Just we. I listened to the message 3 times. Then I sat on the floor of the hallway and stared at the wall until the sun went down and the house turned to shadow. There was no room for me at the bedside. No one called to ask what flowers he would have liked. No one checked if I wanted to say goodbye. But still, I held on to one thing. A file folder in my desk drawer. His will. He'd updated it 6 months before he got sick. I was there. I watched him sign it. He said, "I don't trust anyone else to do the right thing, so I'm spelling it out." And then, quietly, like he didn't want to offend the heir, he added, "They'll come for what they think they're owed. I just want you to have peace." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now I knew he was being prophetic. And that folder, forgotten by them, ignored by the vultures, was about to become my voice. They thought they'd locked me out, but they'd forgotten the truth. He may have died under their watch, but he'd written his final chapter with me. He left this world surrounded by people rewriting our story without me in it. I didn't hear it from the hospital. I didn't hear it from the hospice nurse I'd been calling every morning like clockwork for updates they rarely gave. I heard it from Caroline, a voicemail, 33 seconds. "Just thought you should know, David passed this morning. He went peacefully. We'll be handling the arrangements." No Margaret. No, "Are you okay?" No pause long enough for grief to land. Just a 1-line summary of the man I gave 12 years of my life to. Signed off with a cold dismissal, like she was notifying a dentist's office. I dropped my phone on the kitchen counter and sat on the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't move. There was a glass of water half full on the table, a damp towel from his last bath draped over the side of the laundry basket, the cardigan I used to wrap him in still hanging from the back of a chair. He had existed here, but now, without warning, he was gone, and I hadn't been there. Not to hold his hand, not to whisper something familiar, not even to know. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital in silence. I parked in the visitor's lot I knew too well. I didn't even bring flowers. I brought my ID, my wedding ring still on my hand, and a knot in my stomach tight enough to cut blood flow. When I approached the front desk, the nurse glanced up, her eyes flickering with recognition and guilt. I said, "I'm here to see David Whitaker. I'm his wife." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, but he was moved yesterday." "Moved where?" I asked. "To the private wing. End-of-life care," she replied, already uncomfortable. My chest tightened. No one told me. Her eyes dropped. We had instructions to notify his family only. I was his wife, but somehow that no longer counted. She gave me the room number anyway, maybe out of pity, maybe because her conscience started whispering louder than her protocol. I walked to the private wing. It was quieter than I remembered. Dim lights, hushed voices, the smell of antiseptic and loss. The door to his room was shut. A small white sign taped to it read, "Private Family Only." I stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob like it might burn me, and then I heard it. Inside, laughter. Not hysterical, not celebratory, just casual, unburdened. Caroline, his daughter, a man's voice, his son. I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. No one came out, no one opened the door to check. I left. Not because I didn't want to see him, because I couldn't bear to stand outside my own husband's death like a stranger. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen. I didn't have a photo of him nearby, just the mug he used to drink coffee from, the blanket he hated, but always reached for. I sat at the table, turned off my phone, and said goodbye to him the only way I knew how. You should have let me fight harder for you. But I had fought, quietly, fiercely, endlessly. I had fought when they started replacing me in hospital calls. I had fought when Caroline began booking appointments behind my back. I had fought when his daughter called me just the second wife. But sometimes fighting looks like silence. And sometimes silence looks like surrender, but it isn't. It's survival. And the funeral was announced 3 days later. A small church near his childhood home, an invitation-only service. I was never contacted, not a single word, not from Caroline, not from his children. I found out through a coworker of his, someone who had always been kind to me at office events, someone who didn't realize I hadn't been invited. She said, "I'll see you at the service this weekend. They moved it to Sunday for you, I think." I didn't correct her. I just smiled. Moved it for me? They didn't even tell me, but I still went, dressed in black, heels polished. I curled my hair, wore the necklace he gave me on our 3rd anniversary, the one with the tiny emerald I never took off, even when he said green wasn't my color. I brought white tulips. He hated roses, said they were too obvious. When I arrived at the chapel, Caroline was standing at the steps like a sentinel. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Margaret," she said flatly, "you shouldn't be here." I stared at her. "He was my husband." She shook her head. "You made things difficult near the end. We're trying to keep this day peaceful." "Peaceful for whom?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just stepped aside and motioned to the usher. He moved forward, polite but firm. "The family has asked that this remain a private service." My feet stayed planted. My hands gripped the flowers. And then, quietly, I said, "I am the family." But the doors stayed closed, so I stood there on the gravel path, watching people walk past me like I was a stranger. People who had only seen me once or twice. People who had never stayed up all night beside him when the pain wouldn't stop. People who hadn't watched him shrink, tremble, sweat, and beg not to die. They filed in, whispering condolences to each other. Not one offered a glance in my direction. Not one said my name, but they would. Soon. The will reading was scheduled for the following week, and when the lawyer opened that envelope and began to speak, those same people would finally learn what David left behind and who he left it for. They held his service like I was the scandal to hide, when I was the one who stayed. I stood on the gravel just outside the church doors, clutching tulips that were already starting to droop in the heat. My heels sank deeper with every step I didn't take. No one came to let me in. No one even turned around to acknowledge me. It was as if I'd never existed. Inside, I heard the organ begin to play. Not David's favorite hymn. He hated organ music. Said it always sounded like a funeral, even when it wasn't. That made me laugh once. Not anymore. I leaned slightly toward the door, hoping, stupidly, that anyone, would come outside and say, "She should be here." But no one did. The usher had already returned to his post, face blank, spine stiff, guarding the entrance like I was going to charge the altar and flip over the casket. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to say goodbye. But even that, they stole from me. Caroline had made herself the executor of everything: the hospice schedule, the funeral guest list, the narrative. She had rewritten me out like I was the second wife who married him for money instead of the woman who gave up a promotion, a relocation, and the best years of her life to love a man who was already tired when I met him. She'd always hated me, from the start. Said I was too cold, too practical, not affectionate enough in public, not weepy enough at family holidays. What she really meant was, I didn't perform grief the way she needed me to. And now, she had control of his legacy, his body, and his story. Or so she thought. Inside, I imagined her sitting in the front pew with her handkerchief clutched delicately, dabbing at dry eyes for show, his children beside her, faces twisted into some mockery of sorrow, people who'd spent the last few years circling his illness like opportunity. I bet someone would get up and speak, call him a family man, a pillar, a beloved father. They wouldn't mention me. They wouldn't mention that it was my number the hospital had on file for emergencies for the last 3 years, that it was my hand that signed the consent form for the first chemo round when they were too busy or too hesitant. No, that wouldn't make the slideshow. I watched as guests continued to arrive. Some I recognized from past work events, others probably from his childhood. Not one of them asked why I was standing outside in the sun, holding tulips alone. I had half a mind to leave, to drive home and rip my wedding photo from the hallway wall, to pull out the frozen casserole he liked and toss it in the trash, just to feel something, to go back to pretending I wasn't unraveling at the seams. But I stayed, not because I had hope, but because I had something they didn't. I had the will. I had the lawyer's number saved in my phone. And I had David's signature, in ink on documents they had no idea existed. He'd said to me once, months before his body started giving out, "When it's my time, I know who'll try to hijack it. I won't let them forget who stayed." At the time, I thought it was just frustration talking. But now, standing outside those locked chapel doors, I realized it was a promise. When the service finally ended, the doors opened and people began filing out. Caroline stepped out first, blinking in the sunlight like a woman stepping into applause. She spotted me, didn't flinch, just clutched her purse tighter and walked past without a word. His daughter followed. Her eyes landed on mine briefly, then dropped like she'd seen something shameful. No one said anything, until a boy, maybe 19 or 20, someone's nephew, looked at me and said, "You're her, aren't you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Her?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "The wife." I didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't confirm. I didn't need to. A week later, we were all summoned to the lawyer's office. Same people, same tension. But this time, the doors wouldn't be locked to me. This time, I wasn't the outcast. I was the inheritor. And when my name came up, not whispered, not avoided, but stated boldly, the entire room would realize the one truth they tried so hard to bury. David Whitaker had left his legacy not with the ones who performed grief for applause, but with the one who endured the silence. Me. Grief is cruel, but not as cruel as being erased while you're still alive. The day after the funeral, the house was still. Not just quiet, still. That aching, unnatural silence that follows something seismic. The tulips I brought to the chapel were still on the counter, wilting. I hadn't thrown them away. I think part of me wanted to keep them there, to remind myself that I had shown up, even if no one let me in. I wandered the house barefoot, the floorboards cool and unfamiliar. It already felt like a place he had left long ago. His toothbrush was still in the holder, his slippers tucked under the bed. The armchair he always fell asleep in still carried the shape of him. Grief was supposed to feel like devastation. I was prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for erasure. No one called to check on me. No casserole dishes were dropped off at my door. No messages that said, "I'm sorry, Margaret, that wasn't right." It was like they'd all silently agreed. She doesn't count. She doesn't get to mourn. She doesn't exist anymore. And that hurt more than the loss itself. Because I had already started grieving long before David took his last breath. I grieved the moment I was cut from the hospice updates. I grieved when his son introduced me to a nurse as someone helping out. I grieved when Caroline changed the medical power of attorney without telling me, and I found out weeks later when a doctor ignored my instructions. Grief isn't just about death, it's about absence. Absence where there used to be belonging. I sat on the edge of the bed we used to share, one side still neatly made, my side unkempt. The navy blanket slightly pulled up, the pillow dented with the shape of a head that hadn't rested well in weeks. My phone buzzed, not a condolence message, just a notification. Subject, reading of the Will Whitaker estate. Location, Evan and Rowe Law Offices. Date, time, Thursday, 10 a.m. The email was cold, formal, but it was an invitation, a name on the list, my name. I stared at it for a long time. Half of me thought it was a mistake, but deep down, I remembered. 6 months ago. David at the kitchen table, pen in hand. He'd looked up at me and said, "If they cut you out of my ending, this will put you back in." At the time, I rolled my eyes. Don't be dramatic. But he wasn't being dramatic. He was being deliberate. I closed the email. I didn't reply. I didn't call anyone to confirm. I didn't need to. They could steal the eulogies. They could take the flowers and the front row pews. They could walk through his death like they were the only ones who mattered, but they couldn't touch the last legal truth he left behind, not without unsealing what he had locked in that envelope. I stood up and walked to the closet. His clothes were still there. Dress shirts, polos, the gray cardigan I always said made him look older, but secretly loved. I ran my hands across the hangers, stopped at the blue tie he wore the day we eloped. He never threw it out, even though the thread was unraveling. I held it up to my face and inhaled. It still smelled like him. Lavender detergent. Aftershave. Warmth. I didn't cry. Not then. The grief hadn't broken the surface yet. It was sitting underneath, pressurized, dangerous, waiting. I knew better than to let it come now. I needed to be ready. Because Thursday wasn't just a reading, it was a reckoning. I didn't know what was in that will, but I knew David. And if I was in it, if he had truly left something behind for me, it would not be subtle. It would be bold. He was never good at speaking up in life. But in death? He had nothing left to fear, and neither did I. They thought the performance ended at the funeral. Then the lawyer opened the envelope. The law office sat on the corner of Lexington and Piers, tucked between a dusty insurance agency and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and secrets. The sign on the glass door read, Evan and Rowe LLP, Estate and Family Law. I had passed it before, years ago, back when David and I updated our wills, just after his first health scare. At the time, he was paranoid about everything, had me triple-check the spelling on the documents. He said, "I don't want any confusion when I'm gone." That had been David, guarded, exacting, a man who trusted paperwork more than promises. I didn't mind. Paper didn't lie. I arrived early. 15 minutes to be exact. I sat in my car and watched as one by one the mourners arrived. Caroline pulled up in a leased Mercedes that David used to pay for until I finally convinced him to stop covering her lifestyle. Her hair was pulled tight, her makeup flawless, lips pressed like she was still holding the lie between her teeth. His daughter, Emily, showed up next. Thin, angular, draped in expensive black, like she was still playing widow despite never having been one. Behind her came his son, Lucas, late 30s, forever brooding, arms covered in tattoos he never wanted to explain. He hadn't even spoken to David in the last 4 months. Still, here he was. 2 of David's old business partners arrived together, looking half bored, half eager as if expecting cigars and shares in something they didn't earn. No one looked at me. Not when I got out of the car. Not when I passed them in the lobby. If they were surprised to see me, they didn't show it. But the tension shifted the moment I walked in. Like the room knew. Like the lie was about to unravel. The receptionist greeted me with a clipped, "You're on the list." Of course I was. We were escorted to a small conference room, glass walls, a long mahogany table, and bottled water laid out in neat rows, like this was just another Monday. The lawyer entered precisely at 10. Mr. Evan, thin-framed glasses, a man who didn't smile unless he was billing for it. He sat at the head of the table, cleared his throat, and said, "Thank you all for coming. As executor of Mr. Whitaker's estate, I've been asked to facilitate the reading of his last will and testament." No one blinked. He opened the folder in front of him and began. It started as expected. Legal formalities, date of death, documentation of marriage. I felt Caroline shift in her seat the moment he said, "Spouse, Margaret Whitaker." She didn't look at me, but I could feel the heat rolling off her like she'd just swallowed vinegar. Mr. Evan continued, "To my sister Caroline, I leave my collection of first edition novels, currently housed in the downstairs study. Please treat them better than you treated my marriage." A pause. A visible stiffening in her shoulders. A few snickers. Even Lucas smirked. "To my daughter Emily, I leave my signed acoustic guitar. I hope one day you'll learn to listen more than you speak." I heard her inhale sharply. "To my son Lucas, I leave my grandfather's pocket watch. You were always running late. I figured you might need it." There were no trust funds, no homes, no properties, just carefully chosen objects, each one laced with commentary. They had expected wealth. They got metaphors. And then... Mr. Evan turned the page. "To my wife, Margaret." He said it without fanfare, without hesitation, like the truth it was. I sat up straighter. Everyone else froze. "I leave the following. My primary residence located at 743 Melrose Lane. The entirety of my investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $1.4 million. All residuals from my publishing contracts and the rights to my remaining intellectual property, including patents under Whitaker Industries." Silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The room collapsed in slow motion. Caroline's lips parted like she wanted to object, but there was nothing to say. The words were printed, stamped, notarized. Emily looked stunned, like she had just realized grief didn't come with equity. Lucas looked away, jaw clenched. Mr. Evan continued, "I also leave Margaret the personal letters I wrote during my final months, stored in a lockbox with the house deed. She is the only person I trust to read them." He closed the folder, looked up. That concludes the reading. No one spoke. And then, Caroline snapped, "This is a mistake. He wouldn't do that, not to his family." I turned my head slowly. My voice was calm, steady. "I am his family." Her eyes filled, not with grief, with rage. "You manipulated him. You used his illness. You alienated us." I stood up. "You wrote me out while he was dying. He wrote me back in with his last breath." She stood too, voice shrill. "This isn't over." I smiled then. "No, Caroline, for you it just began." Mr. Evan cleared his throat. "The assets transfer immediately. Any challenges to the will require formal legal action, which will likely fail given the video testimony on file." Caroline looked like she'd been slapped. "Video?" she echoed. He nodded. "Mr. Whitaker recorded a full explanation, with witnesses. Would you like to see it?" She didn't answer. Neither did the others. But I did. "I'd like a copy," I said. He nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Whitaker." Mrs. Whitaker, said clearly, said publicly, said with finality. I gathered my bag, walked past their stunned faces. Not one of them could look me in the eye. Because in the end, David didn't just leave them behind. He left them exposed, and he left me everything. He said my name on camera, and with it erased every lie they built in my silence. The flash drive came in a plain envelope. No fanfare, no embossed seal, just a standard manila rectangle with my name typed across the front. Mr. Evan had handed it to me discreetly as we left the conference room. "For your records," he said, as if this was just another estate transaction, not the detonator that would reduce the fiction Caroline built to ashes. I didn't watch it right away. I waited. I went home, made tea the way David used to, too strong, no sugar. I changed into comfortable clothes, sat in the armchair that still smelled like cedar and memory. Then I slid the flash drive into my laptop and pressed play. The screen flickered. Then there he was. David. Not frail, not hooked up to machines. This was him 6 months ago, when his hair still had color, when his voice still carried weight, when his eyes still lit up like they used to when he saw me walk through the door. He looked directly into the camera. No cue cards, no script, just truth. "If you're watching this," he said, "then you've met my family. Or at least the ones who came out of the woodwork when the money started being counted." I didn't flinch. He went on. "Let me be clear. This video is for legal purposes, but also for peace, my peace. Because I want no confusion about what I valued, who I loved, and who stood by me when it was hard to look in the mirror." There was a pause. He reached off screen, pulled a folded paper from the side table, and held it up. "This is my revised will. It's not about revenge. It's about clarity. About giving Margaret what she earned, what she deserves, and what too many others tried to strip from her." Hearing my name spoken like that, without shame, without avoidance, felt like a balm on wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. He looked off to the side briefly, then back at the camera. His voice grew steadier. "They made her feel small. My sister, my kids, even I, sometimes. Not because she lacked value, but because they didn't want to see it. Because Margaret isn't loud. She's not theatrical. She doesn't make grief a stage play or loyalty a performance. But she showed up, every day, through the worst of it. She took care of me when I was too ashamed to ask." The screen shimmered slightly, an encoding artifact, but I didn't look away. If they're angry now, good. Let them be. Let them know that blood doesn't entitle you to someone's life. Love does. Commitment does. And she gave me both. He smiled then. A soft, tired smile. To those who are watching, wondering why they were left out or left with scraps, maybe you should ask yourselves where you were when I was gasping for air and Margaret was feeding me soup at 3 a.m. Maybe you should ask why she was the only one who knew what meds I took in the morning, why she's the only one who knew where I kept this damn flash drive. I choked back something in my throat. He ended with one sentence. "She was my wife, my only wife, and this is me remembering her, out loud so no one can forget again." Then the screen faded to black. I closed the laptop, sat there in silence. A different kind of silence than the ones they tried to bury me in. This silence was steady, sacred. And then the phone calls started. Caroline, of course, was first. 3 missed calls, then a text. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You humiliated this family." I stared at the screen, typed back one word. "No." I revealed it. She didn't reply, but others did. Lucas emailed me. A short message, no subject line. I didn't know. I should have asked. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. He loved you. It's obvious now, I think. Maybe it always was." I didn't respond right away. I didn't owe him that. But it landed differently. Softer. Less like an excuse. More like a fracture in the wall that had kept me on the outside for so long. Then came the voicemails from acquaintances, people who had known David through business, old friends who hadn't attended the funeral but had heard what happened. I always wondered why they treated you like a stranger. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. Margaret, I watched that clip. He saw you. I hope you know that. If you ever want to grab coffee, I'd love to hear more about him. The real him. I listened to them one by one, sitting cross-legged on the rug we picked out together 5 years ago, back when things felt simple and the word forever still meant something. They were finally saying my name, not behind closed doors, not with pity or suspicion, but with recognition. I didn't need their validation, but it was vindication. He had left me his truth, and now they all had to live with it. Everyone else got their portion of the story. He left me the truth. The envelope was cream-colored, thick and sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp. Tucked inside the lockbox, resting on top of the house deed and a small stack of financial documents. Mr. Evan had mentioned it briefly during the reading, as if it were a footnote. There's a letter addressed to you. In his handwriting, I hadn't opened it right away. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I didn't want to share the moment with anyone, not even the echo of their outrage. This wasn't about inheritance. This wasn't about legal wins. This was personal. I waited until the house was completely silent. Late evening, the air cool enough to open the windows. A soft breeze carried in the scent of the neighbor's jasmine bush. I made tea, real tea. Not the bitter kind David always brewed. Mint with honey. Something soft, something mine. I sat at the kitchen table. The same one where he used to read the paper, grumble at the headlines, push his glasses up his nose like it was second nature. I unfolded the letter. His handwriting greeted me like a familiar voice, crooked, slightly slanted, a little hard to read where the pen had pressed too hard or faded too much. It started simply. Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've thought about that moment 1,000 times. How you'd feel, what you'd say, how you'd carry the weight. I know you'll carry it with grace because you always did, even when I didn't deserve it. I blinked. My hands were already trembling. There's no easy way to say what needs saying. I should have told you when I had time left. I should have said more. But instead, I'm doing what I always do, writing when it's too late to fix things in person. I'm sorry for that. You were my anchor. Even when I drifted, even when I let them make you feel like a stranger in your own life. Caroline was always louder. Emily knew how to perform. Lucas stayed angry at everything. And you stayed kind, quiet, real. They punished you for not making a scene. I admired you for it. I just never said it out loud. I paused, took a deep breath. There was no punctuation to catch your breath in a letter like this. Just confessions and air. I know they shut you out, and I didn't stop them. That's what I regret most. They twisted the end, made you look small. But I saw you, Margaret. I saw the way you held the pieces together, the way you stayed up with me when the nights were bad, the way you tucked extra socks into my hospital bag, even though I always said I didn't need them. You gave me dignity when my own body betrayed me. You made death feel less cruel. I wish I had defended you more. I wish I had spoken louder, but that's what this was for, to say it in writing, for the world to hear. I wiped at my cheek. I didn't even realize I was crying. Not loud sobs, just tears, silent and steady, like a dam that had stopped resisting. This house is yours now, not because it's big, not because it's valuable, but because it's the only place I ever felt like I had a home again after everything fell apart. You made it warm, even when I went cold. They'll never understand what you did for me. Not really, but that's okay. This letter isn't for them. It's for you. You mattered, Margaret. You mattered to me. And when the noise fades and the dust settles, I hope this truth sits louder than their lies. You were my last love, my real one, and I'll never forget how you stayed, even when everyone else tried to push you out. Thank you. David. That was it. No flourish, no P.S., just my name, his name. A full stop that didn't feel like an ending, but like the closing of a chapter I'd carried far too long. I sat with the letter pressed to my chest. The house felt heavier and lighter all at once. He had finally said it. Not with flowers, not with public shows, but in ink, in permanence, in a way no one else could take from me. And suddenly, I didn't feel like the woman locked out of a funeral. I felt like the one who had been loved in truth. Grief fades, but justice leaves an echo, and mine was finally being heard. The world didn't shift all at once. It tilted slowly. The next morning, the sun rose like it always did, as if it hadn't just watched an entire family shatter behind the glass walls of a law office. Birds chirped. The kettle boiled. But something in the air felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just cleared. Like I had been breathing through fog for months, and now I was standing still in air that finally tasted like mine. I walked through the house with bare feet, the floor cool beneath me. No more tiptoeing around ghosts, no more holding back tears in the hallway, no more wondering if I had imagined the distance between us at the end. David had confirmed it all. The letter sat on the kitchen counter, folded once, the crease clean and firm. I hadn't put it away yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I made a new folder, labeled it TRUTH in thick black Sharpie. Inside, the will, the deed, the letter, the lawyer's card, the flash drive, all of it, proof of who I was, of who he knew I was. By midday, the messages started flooding in. Some came from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former co-workers, distant relatives, acquaintances who once smiled tight-lipped at family barbecues while whispering behind paper cups of punch. The will reading had made the rounds. Someone had leaked it, likely Caroline herself, in an effort to build a narrative of manipulation and injustice. But the plan backfired, spectacularly, because people weren't siding with her. They were curious, sure. Gossip is gossip. But the tide had turned. The video made its way online. Not the whole thing, just one clip. David, looking straight into the camera, saying, "Blood doesn't entitle you to someone's life. Love does. Commitment does. And she gave me both." It spread like wildfire. Not viral in the TikTok sense, but in quiet corners. Women forwarding it to their sisters. Widows watching it with shaking hands. Strangers commenting, "This gave me chills." She must have been something special. Thank you, David, for saying what so many are too cowardly to admit. And then the private messages, some from friends of his who hadn't known what was happening. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I never saw it, but I believe you now. He always spoke about you when we were alone, always called you his calm in the storm. I wish I had said something when they started excluding you. I should have, should have, should have, should have." It was a symphony of regret, but I didn't respond to most of them, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need their permission anymore. I was done chasing acknowledgement like oxygen. Then came the message that stopped me. Caroline. Email. Subject, a formal request. I opened it, expecting venom, but it was restrained. "Margaret, I'd appreciate it if you didn't share the rest of the video publicly. The children are embarrassed. It's one thing to be left out of a will. It's another to be dragged through the mud. We've suffered enough. Please don't make this worse. No, I'm sorry. No, you were right. Just a plea to maintain dignity after they denied me mine." I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Mr. Evan. Let the lawyer handle the remains. Because I was done managing other people's messes. That afternoon, I stepped into David's office, now mine. I opened the windows, let light spill in, took down the dusty awards he never looked at, boxed up the family photos that never included me. Then I hung something new, a frame. Inside, one sentence from his letter, printed in black ink on white parchment. "You mattered, Margaret." It sat on the wall above the desk, centered, quiet, solid. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down, and opened a blank journal. Page 1. Today I started writing my own story. No more footnotes. No more being edited out. No more letting other people control the narrative. David was gone. But what he left me wasn't just money, it was the truth, and the right to finally say it out loud. They buried me in silence. I built a microphone out of their shame. It started with one post, no caption, no context, just a photo. Our marriage certificate, folded neatly, laid flat on a table. On top of it, my wedding ring. Next to it, the wax-sealed envelope David left me. 3 objects, no hashtags, no story attached. And yet, it said everything. I didn't expect it to matter, but within hours, my inbox was full. Messages from women I didn't know who saw themselves in every line I hadn't written. I wasn't invited to my husband's funeral either. They told me I wasn't technically family after 10 years. My mother-in-law erased me from the obituary. I thought I was crazy. And then this one, thank you for existing out loud. That phrase hit me like thunder, because for so long I hadn't. I had existed quietly, in service, in shadow, in survival. Now I was finally being seen by people who mattered. The funeral had been the performance, this question mark. This was the curtain call I started writing, not for them, for me. A blog. I wrote about the first time I realized I wasn't welcome in his family, when Caroline referred to me as the help in heels under her breath. I wrote about the anniversary dinner I cooked alone when they had accidentally taken David to a private family event I wasn't told about. I wrote about standing in a hospital hallway for 2 hours while they sat beside his bed and called themselves his support system. Each entry felt like pulling splinters from under my skin. Painful, but clean. Necessary. Eventually, I made the blog public. Not for attention, but for clarity. If anyone Googled Margaret Whittaker, I wanted them to find more than silence. The stories began circulating quietly, shared among grief groups, reposted by mental health advocates, picked up by a podcast host who emailed me saying, "Your story isn't just tragic, it's necessary." I declined the interview, not because I wasn't ready to speak, but because I had already said what mattered. I didn't need to narrate my pain to prove it was real. What I needed was mine. I started reclaiming my space, physically. The house, the one they thought I didn't deserve, began to change under my fingertips. I tore down the heavy curtains David had always liked, replaced them with sheer ones that let the light in like forgiveness. I sold the leather recliner he used to fall asleep in and replaced it with a bright yellow reading chair. I painted the guest room a soft green and filled it with plants. No more hushed tones, no more muted palettes, no more pretending I liked the cold, minimalist world he built to feel in control. I didn't just inherit the house. I reclaimed it, room by room. And then I did something I never imagined I'd have the courage to do. I hosted a dinner, not a memorial, not a fundraiser, just a gathering of the people who showed up when it wasn't convenient. People who texted after the will reading not to gossip, but to say, "How are you really?" People who didn't need David's permission to see my worth. 6 guests, real napkins, no assigned seating, no passive-aggressive speeches, just roasted vegetables, lemon chicken, too much red wine, and laughter that didn't wait for permission. We talked about everything and nothing, books, dogs, awful first dates, and for once, no one brought up David. Not because he didn't matter, but because I did. As we cleared the dishes, my friend Elise hugged me and whispered, "You look lighter." I smiled. It's because I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen alone, fingers resting on the counter, lights dim, window cracked just enough to let the breeze in. I didn't feel haunted anymore. I felt holy. Not because I'd won, but because I was no longer waiting to be chosen. David's voice had cleared the path, but it was my voice that filled it, and now no one could take it from me. They left me with 4 walls and grief. I turned it into a sanctuary no one could erase me from. I used to avoid certain rooms in this house. The guest room, his office, the back porch where we had our last argument, the one where he said, I'm too tired to fight for you anymore. The sentence haunted me for months, but now I understood. He wasn't tired of me. He was tired of fighting them, fighting for space in his own family to acknowledge his truth. I no longer feared those rooms. I claimed them. The guest room, once filled with cold beige walls and linen that smelled like starch and indifference, became my writing room. I painted it a color called Pine Whisper, not for symbolism, just because it made me feel calm. I placed a second-hand desk by the window, set the framed quote from David's letter on the wall. "You mattered, Margaret." And then I placed something else, my own quote, printed in bold. "And I always will." The office was trickier. It still smelled like him, still felt like him. The carpet bore the indentation of his chair, but it was time. I boxed up the industry magazines, donated the textbooks, kept only one thing, a paperweight shaped like a compass. He once gave it to me when I felt lost. He said, "You'll always know where you are when you hold something steady." I kept it on the windowsill, facing east, so every morning it would catch the sun. Then came the living room. I replaced the stiff, angular couch his daughter picked with one I actually wanted to sit on, soft curved edges, cushions that invited naps and books and bare feet. I filled the walls with photos they never wanted framed, me in the garden, us at the lake. A candid shot from our anniversary, me laughing, his hand on my back. Photos where I wasn't cropped out, photos where I wasn't just a +1 to his life. Then I tackled the kitchen. I threw out the pan they once scorched when they came to visit and insisted on taking over dinner while I was too slow. I replaced every mug with chipped handles. I bought new dishes, not white and sterile, but vibrant, blues and burnt oranges. I wanted my meals to look like they were loved before being eaten. I wasn't just changing the house, I was stripping their fingerprints off it. Every drawer I organized, every curtain I rehung, every room I stood in without flinching. It was a ritual, a quiet exorcism, a declaration. You don't live here anymore, I do. Sometimes I'd still hear them in my head. Caroline's condescending tone, Emily's performative sorrow, Lucas's silent judgment. But it no longer made me shrink. It made me taller, firmer, unapologetic. I walked barefoot on the floors I once tiptoed across, played music while I cleaned, loud, sometimes vulgar, always joyful. And when I finally opened the last closet, the one where David had stored all the things too sentimental to throw away, I found something I hadn't expected, a box labeled "For Her." Inside, the earring I lost on our third date, a pressed flower from the park where we used to walk, the first birthday card I gave him with the inscription, "You make me feel known." A photo of me asleep on the couch, his handwriting on the back. Peace looks like her. I sat on the floor, surrounded by proof that I wasn't erased. I was just never celebrated by the wrong people. David saw me, loved me, honored me. And now, in this space that once rejected my existence, I was the author, the architect, the soul. They could keep their legacy of denial. This house had become my home again, and not even grief could take that from me. They wrote me out. He wrote me back in. I carved the ending in my own name. It's strange what peace feels like. You think it's going to be loud, triumphant, but it's not. Peace is quiet. Like the absence of a storm you didn't realize you'd been standing in your whole life. It's coffee that stays hot while you drink it. A front door you no longer brace yourself before opening. Silence that doesn't scream at you anymore. It had been 6 months. The will had long been settled. The lawyers stopped calling. The gossip faded. Caroline had made one last attempt to contest David's estate. The judge dismissed it, called the video irrefutable. She left the courtroom that day with eyes like scorched glass and a mouth too tight to speak. Emily never reached out again. Lucas sent a birthday card. No return address, just, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Some chapters don't need sequels, only endings. I had started teaching writing workshops at the community center, just once a week. Women my age and older. Widows, divorcees, daughters, forgotten ones. I asked them at the first session, "What's the one thing you were never allowed to say?" The answers cracked the room open. I didn't love him anymore. I was never sorry. I deserved better. One woman whispered, "I wish someone had told me I mattered." I smiled. "Let's write that down then." I didn't tell them everything about me, just enough to let them know I understood. I had once been erased too, and now I was the pen. The house was full of small joy. Basil growing in the windowsill, a soft robe hanging by the bathroom door, lemon pie cooling on the counter made just for me. I lit candles without waiting for guests, bought myself flowers because I wanted them, not because anyone was watching. I had stopped waiting for permission to feel worthy. One afternoon I walked past the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral, didn't plan to go, but my feet turned. Just for a moment. The grave was simple. David James Whittaker. Beloved husband, father, brother. I smiled. Because I knew the truth. I stood there a moment, then knelt. Placed something at the base of the stone, a printout of the final blog post I had written, titled, "They didn't let me in. He left me the keys." And underneath, just one line, "I didn't get to speak at your funeral, so I wrote the eulogy with my life." I stood, brushed off my jeans, walked away, and this time, I didn't look back, because I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward everything I had built from the ashes, not with vengeance, but with authorship, with dignity, with truth. They buried me in shame. He left me his voice, and I turned it into my own. The final word wasn't theirs. It was mine.